Stephanie Vance, and we're going to get started. I want to welcome you all to the American Association of Museums Online Advocacy Training Series Part 3, Building Relationships with Elected Officials. And these are some strategies for getting to know them, even if you aren't sure if you want to. This is how we're going to build a long-term relationship with our legislators to make sure that they can support us over time. I will be explaining muting, Q&A, and other details in just a moment. And here are our topics for the session. About the online training session, I'll explain very briefly who's speaking. We're going to hear from Dr. Bell, why and for those who are wondering, well, how many people are on the call today? We actually have when all is said and done, I believe we'll have over 100 people on the call. We've got more people popping in right now, and we've got about 90. So we're in great shape in terms of museums around the country getting access to this information. So, online training session. For those who haven't been on one of these sessions before, what's happening is a viewer screen has popped up on your computer, which is showing a PowerPoint on my desktop. And you heard us with some audio issues. Basically, everyone has joined in a mute-only mode, and I have power over muting and unmuting, and we'll be unmuting a few folks who will be joining us to give some presentations, particularly from the very specific museum's perspective. If you have questions that you want to ask during the session, you will need to type plus sign, open that box up. You can type a question in there, and I will be addressing those as we go through the presentation. And we also have some follow-up materials, and these are going to be available on the Speak Up for Museums site. Everyone asks if they will have access to the PowerPoint and the recordings, and they absolutely will. And I'm just that when you go to speakupformuseums.org and you want to make sure you're on the right page, this will be the page where everything will be posted. Obviously, we're not going to be posting the recording until the session is done. So don't go to the page and say, hey, I don't see the recording yet. But we will be posting that as soon as we can. It does take a little time to process the recording. So, and for those I haven't met who are wondering who's speaking, this is me. I am Stephanie Vance. I am known as the Advocacy Guru, and I've had the pleasure of working with the American Association of Museums on a couple issues, including the last Museums Advocacy Day, and we'll also be involved in the upcoming Museums Advocacy Day, which you'll be hearing a little bit more about. My background is based in congressional affairs. I worked for several different members of Congress. I've lobbied for National Public Radio, and I've been a legislative aide at a lobbying law firm, and have a lot of completely useless degrees to that effect, legislative affairs, for example. And so my background is really in advocacy. I'm the person who is often advocated at when people come to Washington, D.C., where I used to be. My background is not as intensive in museums, although I've had the opportunity to work with you all for a while. So as we're going through, and speaking of the museum world, I've got Dr. Bell on the line, who is going to give us a little welcome, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute that line. And Dr. Bell, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. It's great to be with you today, and welcome to everybody to Part 3 of AAM's free online advocacy training series. It's great that so many of you have been able to join us today. This session really gets to the heart of what our field needs to do if we want to see an increase in federal support for museums. Build relationships with our elected officials. That's the key. People often ask me why 17,500 museums in America have to compete for just $35 million in grant funding from the only agency of the federal government with the word museum in its name, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And the answer is simple. The museum field simply hasn't made a strong enough case. We haven't brought a clear and united message about the public value of museums to the people, our elected officials. As a result, museums have been targeted for funding cuts several times this year alone. Museums are, unfortunately, seen as nice but not essential, and we need to prove them wrong. We've been easy targets, because our legislators may not know, often don't know, the vital role that museums play in education or how much museums drive local economies. We haven't shared our successes and our challenges with those who represent us in Washington. So building relationships with our elected officials is the first key step. And attending next year's Museums Advocacy Day is a tremendous way to jumpstart that process. You'll meet face-to-face with your legislators and their staff, and you'll leave those offices with the all-important business cards of the key contacts in each office. So next time an issue arises that affects museums, you'll know exactly whom to contact. And when members of Congress want to know how certain issues will affect their local museums, they'll know whom to contact, you. So I hope you'll join us on March 22nd and 3rd in Washington, D.C. next year, and I hope you'll bring your trustees, your staff, your volunteers, and your board members involved in advocating on behalf of our museums. When we launched this important event last year, we made it free to the entire museum field because we knew how important an advocacy day would be. This coming year, we really need your help. We are currently looking for sponsors for the two-day event to help offset the costs. All of our ongoing advocacy efforts, like this online program, and all of the resources that you will find on our advocacy webpage, www.speakupformuseums.org. You can help support AAM's advocacy efforts right there on our website. You can personalize and send a letter to Congress on a number of issues. You can learn more about key issues or invite your members of Congress to visit your museum. Always a good idea. You can contact me at any time at fbell, F as in Ford, bell at aam-us.org with any questions or suggestions. And advocacy is just one of the many benefits and learning opportunities AAM provides to the museum field. If you aren't already a member of AAM, I hope that this is the year when you're going to join. AAM membership benefits include deep discounts on professional development programs, including live and workshops and retreats, a discounted rate on AAM's annual meeting, which will be held in Los Angeles next year, access to our great museum magazine, discounted rates on more than 300 titles from the AAM bookstore, and access to our information center, which offers expert assistance and confidential, customized guidance on any museum matter. As you can see, we have a lot going on at AAM and many ways for you to get involved. So please visit our website at www.aam-us.org to learn more about any of our programs and services. So thanks once again for taking time to be with us today. And with that, I'll turn it back over to AAM's official advocacy guru, Stephanie Vance.
Thank you very much, Ford. I'm glad to know that I am the official advocacy guru, except no substitute for your advocacy guru. There is only me. And I'm going to go ahead and mute your line unless you want to chime in so much. And I want to mention to the folks on the call how lucky you are to have your leadership engaged in this. It tells me how incredibly important advocacy is to the work that you're doing, because I work with a lot of groups, so you don't always get the president of the organization in there talking about advocacy, so that's great. All right, so let's get a quick sense of where we're starting from with the folks on the call, and I'm going to go ahead and open a poll here asking you how many people are gathered with you to watch this session. And if you want to just pick one of these options, it gives us a good sense of the reach of the training session. And we'll wait a couple seconds for all the votes to come in. We've got 87% in. And great, I think we've got everyone in who's going to vote. We've got 91%. That seems like a good percentage. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So for the most part, it's just, I shouldn't say just because you're all very important individuals. A couple of people have 2 or 3 people on the line, and that's great. Do remember that these sessions, it is possible to have other people join you, and it would be great, as Ford mentioned, to have trustees and volunteers, et cetera, on the line as well. I also want to get a sense of where we're starting from in terms of legislative relationships. So I'm actually going to launch another poll asking you how you would describe those relationships. Do you talk to your legislators pretty often? Do you see them a few times per year? Do you talk to them rarely, every once in a while, or you haven't talked as much with your legislator, but you're eager to start? And we've got almost 90% of the votes in. And I should mention, wherever you are on the spectrum, we hope that you'll get some good ideas out of the training session. If you talk with your legislators often, I hope you'll also send us some questions and chat messages. Help us as we're talking about the different techniques to use, because you've got all the great experience. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So actually, a plurality of us haven't talked with our legislator much, and so hopefully we'll give you some great ideas how to do this from the safety of your own communities. I talk to my legislators rarely. I see them a few times per year, all sort of in that range, and we've got a few folks who really talk with their legislators quite often and have a positive relationship with them. So, regardless of where you are on that spectrum, do feel free to use the Q&A box to send us questions. If you've got some great stories too, that's also you can make statements within that Q&A box. So we appreciate any insights that you have, and let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I really want to mention is why building these relationships matters. I think it's great that everyone is hopefully on the call is planning to come to Advocacy Day or be engaged in some way. But there is a lot of chaos in Washington, D.C. About 10,000 bills that are introduced in a congressional session, and only about 4% of those actually get through the entire process. There's 147,000 associations trying to get their message across, and legislators are really trying to manage every issue under the sun. And what's so critical about building these relationships is you don't want to be just one face that comes in once out of 147,000 a year to try and deliver a message. You really want to be the person that they turn to when any kind of museum issue is being discussed in the legislature. And this is also explains why it's important to get to know some of the staff. The legislators, as you might imagine, are trying to vote on everything from energy to transportation to healthcare to museum issues to trade with China. And it's very important to get to know the staff, because sometimes they will actually be the ones who are going to move your advocacy effort a little bit more forward. Now, I really think when you're thinking about building that relationship with your legislators in D.C., you have to think about the spectrum of asks. There are really different kinds of asks, and before this sort of outlines the various kinds of asks. There's easy asks, which are, will you come to our museum, will you make a statement, or will you vote for this controversial bill or expensive program? A lot of times when we're starting to communicate with our legislators, we ask them for something specific, like a certain level of funding for IMLS, but we haven't really built the relationship with these easier asks ahead of time, and so we might not always get a yes to our sort of higher cost, possibly higher opposition ask, because the legislator doesn't really know a lot about us. So the reason, for example, that the museum field was successful in defeating the most recent Coburn Amendment, this was the one on the transportation bill, was because many museums had already built a positive relationship with legislators and were able to make an argument that although cutting funding is obviously popular right now, reducing transportation and these relationships were really begun or solidified at the museum's Advocacy Day in 2009, and they were sort of built over time with some of the easier asks, and then sort of moved on to some of these harder asks. So as you're thinking about building that relationship, think about what are some of the easier asks that I can get my legislators to say yes to before I launch into some of the more difficult ones. And really the techniques for building a relationship are, in my mind, the easier asks. When we're communicating with our legislators, it is important to ask them for something specific. A lot of times we like to simply educate them about museums. We simply want to say, our museum but our legislators are not as likely, or their staff are not as likely to be engaged if we don't ask for something specific. But we can ask for something much easier, such as a museum visit, participating in a town hall meeting, or simply reviewing our newsletter, writing an article for our newsletter. All of these different things are things that easy asks that we can make to build a relationship. And so we're going to talk about each of these 5 different techniques for building a relationship, and starting with not having to reinvent the wheel. So strategy number 1, don't reinvent the wheel. You'll see in this particular cartoon that they've turned it into a bar, which is fine if you want to reinvent the wheel in that way. But what our strategy is really about is incorporating advocacy into what you're already doing. It's not, we don't want you to have to feel like, oh, I have to do something entirely new for advocacy. I have to invent something else. I have to add it into my already busy schedule. What we really want you to do is think about ways that you can incorporate advocacy into the work that you're already doing. So these are some ideas for how not to reinvent the wheel. If you've got a newsletter, add your legislators and the staff to newsletter lists. Now, when you do that, don't be, sort of thinking that they're going to be all excited every time they get the newsletter. They probably won't pay as close attention to it as you would like, but it sort of is a branding thing. They keep seeing your name coming across their desk, and they will be more willing to communicate with you and perhaps be with you on some of the harder asks because they know a little bit about you. If you've got press releases that you send out from your museum, add the press secretary for the office to the press release list just so they can see what kinds of work you're doing, especially if you are sending press releases about work that you're doing in the community. If you've got already planned events, invite legislators and staff, and don't forget the local staff. The local staff of the legislators, every legislator in Washington, D.C. has district offices in the House House members have district offices around their district, and the senators have district offices all around the state. So find out where the closest district office is for you and invite legislators and staff to those already planned events. Ask legislators or staff to speak at planned meetings. Again, as Ford mentioned, them getting to know your board members, your friends, your trustees, your volunteers. If you've got any kinds of planned meetings already, ask the legislators and again, or the in those meetings. If you are a museum that has available meeting space, and I know not all of us do, I know many of us are smaller organizations that may not have a meeting space, but if you do have a meeting space, let the legislators know that they are available for your event. Now, make sure that you are familiar with the 501c3 rules on this. If you've got space, it needs to be made available to all legislators at the same rate, even if that's free. And you do have a 60-day window around the elections where you can't make the space available. So just be familiar with those regulations and also any state regulations that might apply in your election. And you also want to, if you've got events and you've invited your legislators or staff people into them, make sure you're taking advantage of that by taking pictures and incorporating them into your newsletter or your web page. And even these simple steps, any one of us could take one of these steps. It might take us about 5 minutes to add a legislator or staff people to our newsletter list, for example. Any one of these simple steps will simply provide a lot of assistance in getting you higher up on the radar screen for legislators. When you've got all that chaos in Washington, D.C., you've got 10,000 bills introduced, you've got 147,000 associations trying to deliver a message, you do want to figure out ways to get higher up on the radar screen so that the legislator recognizes you and your name and your museum's name when you walk in the door. So that is strategy number 1, not reinventing the wheel, taking a look at everything you're already doing and seeing if you can incorporate relationships with legislators into that. Strategy number 2 is museum visits. And I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of them, and then I want to talk about how to do museum visits. Museum visits are really good because legislators are often more accessible and comfortable in the district. This is what I refer to as home style versus DC style, which is actually a political science term. Most legislators do have a home style or a DC style. When they're in D.C., they're usually running around like crazy to a lot of different meetings. But when they're back at home, they can tend to be a little bit more relaxed. They have a little bit more time. They can often be more comfortable because they're spending time with their family. And The couple other benefits, a museum visit makes the issue real to legislators. It makes esoteric policy and funding issues much more tangible to them. It's one thing to request $50 million for museums for IMLS. It's quite another thing to see the benefits of a grant or how a proposed grant would make a difference to the legislators in their districts, to their constituents. Benefits, it can also be easier to get their attention. You know, they do have a lot of people clamoring for their attention in the district, but you know, when it compares to the chaos going on in Washington, D.C., it can be a little easier to get them to focus for a little bit of time on your particular issues. And it's also easier for you to arrange. You don't have to deal with long-distance phone calls, and sometimes you're dealing in your own time zone, and you can really manage the scheduling of it a lot easier when you're trying to schedule something in the district. So those are the benefits of museum visits, why we would want to do them. How to do them. And before I go to how to do them, I do have a question here that I just want to let the questioner know. We're going to address this question of form letters, the email templates from AAM. We will be discussing that in just a moment, so no concerns there. All right, so how to do museum visits. First of all, it's very important to know the legislative calendar. And there's great resources on the House and Senate website that tell you when legislators will be back in their districts for what we call the district work period. We used to call it recess, but that sounded like they were having too much fun. So you will see here that we definitely call it the district. There we go. And the district work periods are when they're back in their districts for an extended period of time. That's the House schedule. You'll see the Senate schedule. If you just excuse me, these links are built into the PowerPoint, but you can also go to the House and Senate websites at house.gov and senate.gov, and there's a link from the home pages. Now, this one gives you the work periods for November. The House thought that they had their target adjournment of October 30th, but that clearly didn't happen. So they don't have the exact timing for their different district work periods, but they're usually along the lines of the Senate. And they don't have the calendar yet for next year, but this is just a place where you will find a lot of that. And you'll see that they have similar, similar schedules, usually around President's Day. There's a week around Easter. There's a week called the spring, 2 weeks, called the spring district work period. Memorial Day, there's a week. Independence Day, there's a week. Labor, and then the month of August through Labor Day is. So that's pretty standard throughout the year. And then you can always check these schedules to see when the legislators will be back at home. Also, don't forget that when you call the office in June and they say, oh, I'm not going to see you until August, that's why, because that's when the next district work period is. Now, then, next thing you need to think about is who you're going to invite on the museum visit. And the first thing to think with there is to really start with your own legislator. That's going to be the person who's going to be most interested in what's going on in their particular district or state. And your own legislator doesn't always have to be just the legislator that represents located. It can also be a legislator where you live. It can be a legislator where your trustees or your friends or your volunteers live. But you know, at least the legislator that represents the physical location of the museum is always a good place to start. And when I say legislator, I also should mention, don't forget the staff people, because one key tool for getting legislators to do visits is to get the staff to do them first. We do a lot of work with groups trying to arrange these kinds of visits, and people often ask us, well, I can never get the legislator there. It's so difficult. But they did say they wanted their district director to go to the site. Would that work? And I always say, oh my gosh, yes, get success and a lot more time by starting with the district person and getting them really engaged in the issue, and then they will communicate to the legislator how valuable the site visit is. There are some potential pitfalls to think about in who to invite. For example, if you've got two legislators running against each other, you want to make sure that, first of all, that they probably shouldn't be in the same place at the same time if you don't want a fist fight. And secondly, that you understand any rules about 501c3s and how they can be seen as electioneering, being involved in electioneering, which you certainly don't want. You need to, if you've got a public event going on, you just need to make sure that you understand those rules. And there is a page on the AAM website that will give you access to that information. Deciding what to show them. The key point here is to really show them all the or if an IMLS grant can help you provide better services, show them how. This is the time to really highlight the value that you bring to the community, but it's also the time to highlight what the legislator can do to be a better partner with you in providing that value. The invitation process, persistence. It's not enough to simply send in one written request and then wonder why they don't get back to you. You need to keep working it until you get it scheduled. So the very first step is to find out who schedules district-related visits. And sometimes that's done in the district office. Sometimes that's done in Washington, D.C. All you need to do is call the office and figure out who you should send the communication to. Then you're going to want to submit that in writing. That's the very first thing they'll ask you to do. It has to go through several people. And when I say in writing, I mean either in an email or a fax, and they'll tell you which way they prefer. The key, though, is that it needs to be sort of in a format that they can forward to other people. So you can't just call and leave a message and say you want to set something up. You do need to submit something in writing. Once you submit it the first time in writing, whether in an email or a fax, I would say that probably less than 10% of the office will actually respond. So you need to call back maybe a week later and say, hey, did you get the invitation, and agree to send it again if they didn't receive it. And keep working that. It might take, sometimes it takes on average between 5 and 7 contacts with an office to get something scheduled, so you got to keep working it. Thinking about who should attend on your end, it's really important to engage real people. Not that everyone on the call isn't a real person, but friends, trustees, volunteers, and really those who enjoy the museum services should be involved in the visit. It should be not just the administrators of the museum, but really the people who benefit from the services you provide. On logistics, the key point there is that you are responsible for any and all logistics. Never assume that the legislator will get him or herself to the museum, for example. Know how that's going to happen. Know what's going to happen if you're trying to show something outside and it rains. Have a contingency plan in place. If you're doing a visit around a mealtime, know if you can offer the legislator a meal. Often you can't because of the gift rules. They may need to eat it standing up. These are all things that logistics that you need to be aware of. And for those who are wondering, why would they have to stand up while they're eating a meal? This is a gift rule in Washington, D.C. that you can't feed a legislator because they're so upset about some of the unscrupulous things that have happened. But you can actually give them finger food. So, and the way that they decide whether it's finger food is if they're standing up. Really? I can't make this stuff up. Recording the event. You also want to make sure that if you're conducting the visit, you have someone else who is taking pictures and notes. Being distracted with that while you're trying to show the legislator around. They do expect you to take pictures of them looking at your collection, so don't be shy. You shouldn't worry about, oh, well, will they be uncomfortable with the camera? They're politicians. They love cameras. Even their staff are used to cameras, so don't feel uncomfortable about that. I mean, you can always ask, do you mind if I take a picture? And they'll always say, oh, yes, we love it. And make sure that you send them copies because they do like to sometimes post those on their website, or they do like to include them in their own newsletters. So that is strategy number 2, how to do museum visits. Strategy number 3, town hall meetings. And before I go on to town hall meetings, I'm just going to check to see if we've got any questions about museum visits. And I've got 2 questions now on form letters versus personalized letters. So I'm just going to address that because I want to make sure that we are addressing this as we're going forward. So the questions are similar. Do form letters work, or is it better to send a handwritten invitation, or is a form letter okay? Actually, these might be a little bit different. In terms of the invitation, again, a handwritten one, actually, if it has to go to Washington, D.C., it can get delayed because all handwritten communications going to Washington, D.C. have to make a pit stop in New Jersey where they are irradiated. And so they come into the office about 2 weeks late, and they are the integrity of the paper is actually damaged when they irradiate it. So actually, pieces of paper going to Washington, D.C., the best way to get them in are to fax them. I think that in terms of the invitation itself, you know, an invitation from the person who would be conducting the visit, the executive director, or a key member on the board of trustees who knows the legislator, that's going to be part of your work and learning a little bit about the legislator to understand who would be most likely, who would he or she most likely to accept an invitation. Should include anything that you would normally include on an invitation, which is that information I noted earlier about who will be there, what you want to show them, and the time frame that you're looking at. And then sort of this more general question about whether form letters actually worked. The questioner notes that we receive email templates from AAM and always fill them out, which is great, but wonder how effective that is. The best thing to do when you receive a request to send in a form email communication is to personalize that email. So if you're filling it in, that tells me that you're personalizing it, which is what you need to do in order to capture their attention. Now, they do receive thousands. Some offices receive millions of email communications, but the ones that they pay attention to are the ones that are personalized. So if you're willing to undertake that activity, sending in the communication through the email template, maybe think about whether some of the talking about, for example, doing a site visit, or now we're going to talk a little bit about town hall meetings, think about whether that might be something that you'd be willing to devote some time to. And I've got a great note here. We have asked our lobbyists to deliver invitations, and this has been effective. So a great note from someone who's done this kind of museum visit work in the past. If you've got a lobbyist for your institution, that can be a good way to do it as well. And one last question on museum visits: what is a good time frame? I think if you try to show the legislator something in, maybe an hour to an hour and a half, no longer, that's usually the time frame that they can commit to when they're back in the district. Sometimes it has to be shorter. Sometimes they may say, well, I can only stop by for half an hour. But I would, when you're initially pitching it, I would suggest maybe about an hour to pitch initially. All right. Now, the benefits of town hall meetings. This is our strategy number 3. And your first reaction might be, oh, town hall meetings, I heard all they ever do is yell and scream at those. And actually, town hall meetings can be an effective way to engage legislators. As a former staff person, I would definitely have experiences where my boss would go back to the district, have a town hall meeting, meet with people, and someone would ask him, hey, I wrote into your office and asked you to co-sponsor this legislation, and I didn't hear back. And then my boss would come back and say, hey, how come we didn't co-sponsor this legislation? And that certainly raised that issue to the top of my to-do list. And so I'd say, well, we sort of buried in the stack. And he'd say, well, this person raised it. Can you look into it and let me know if I should co-sponsor it? And usually it was something that, yes, the legislator could pretty easily co-sponsor. And so it's a great way to try and capture their attention a little bit directly. Also, a town hall meeting leaves if one person is there and asks a question, it leaves the impression that everyone is concerned. It really has an exponential effect when you raise an issue at a town hall meeting. It raises your profile and increases your credibility by delivering an effective message. If you have meeting space, if you're a large enough museum that you do, you can actually get your legislators in the door sometimes. And if you engage an elected official in a discussion, it can require them to take a public stance, which is always nice to do because then it makes it a lot easier First of all, finding out when they are. Ask your congressional offices, and again, be sure to let them know if you have space, but just contacting your legislative offices and saying to them, hey, I understand there's a district work period coming up. Are you going to be having any town hall meetings? When might they be? Easiest way to do it. It's not rocket science. But secondly, understanding your audience. And the key thing to remember here is that you'll really have two audiences. There's the public attending, and then there's the legislator and the staff. And you want to make sure that you are familiar with the intricacies of both audiences, because if you stand up in this very public forum to make a statement, you'll want to know if the audience that is the public is with you in addition to the legislator and staff. If you raise an issue publicly and all the public people at the town hall meeting say, oh, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard, that's probably not going to make a great impression on the legislator and staff, which leads me to understanding the situation. As I mentioned, town halls are a very public forum, and it is good to get a read of the crowd before raising an issue. Sometimes you might want to raise it privately before or after. So you can go to the town hall meeting, usually meet with the take a few minutes afterwards to meet with the district staff person. For the most part, town hall meetings have had in the past tend to be very lightly attended. You know, you'd be lucky if you got 20 people in a town hall meeting. Certainly that was not the case recently in the healthcare town hall meetings, but for the most part, a personal conversation with the legislator before or after. Now, your message for attending a town hall meeting needs to be the same kind of message that you would use in any sort of lobbying meeting. So you want to be personal, relevant, specific about what you want, and clear about the benefits to the legislators' constituents. So this is not just the opportunity to again, sort of educate them about the value of museums in the community. You really want to be specific about how they can help you help you continue to and we were able to provide those benefits through this grant that we received, or we're looking to get a grant to do X, Y, and Z. Following up, you might want to consider leaving behind a one-pager, and in past training sessions, we've given you the economic impact statement form that you can use to create customized materials, and we're actually going to hear from Kathy Foley, who put one together for the Woodson Art Museum, which does a great job on this. And that statement will really clarify the benefits that you provide to the community and how the Congressional office might help. So that's strategy number 3. Strategy number 4 is coalition building. And to me, coalitions really help you deliver a museum-friendly message to a wider audience. And I really want to focus on that audience because I think that coalition building should be considered in terms of the audience. What interests your key audience members, and how can you find a partner on your end to help deliver that message? That, to me, is the magic of coalitions. A lot of times when we think about coalitions, we start by thinking about who already thinks like we do and how can we get them engaged. But coalitions, if you think about them sort of on the flip side, what is my audience most interested in, and how can I get groups involved that will capture the attention of my audience? You'll find that your coalition will be that much more effective. So, for example, if your legislator is interested only in economic development issues, you're never able to get them engaged on any other issue, consider partnering with a business interest in the community and then having those business interests being the ones talking to the legislators, talking about the value that you bring in terms of quality of life to the community that encourages, business leaders, et cetera, to keep their businesses there. That legislator, if they're very interested in economic development, is going to be a lot more likely to listen to the business leaders in the community than, frankly, they might be to listen to you directly. So this, to me, are the true benefits of coalition building. Now, how do we build coalitions? We're actually going to do a session. The part 4 of the online training session is about engaging others in your cause, but this is sort of a little taste. As I mentioned, finding coalitions, you really want to start with an understanding of your audience and then brainstorm with your existing partners, friends, trustees, volunteers, et cetera, to see what groups they might already be connected with. You also want to think about those political considerations. Are there groups that you don't want to partner with? And then you want to think about your coalition member strengths. You always want to identify upfront about what their strengths might be. Is a coalition member very good at messaging? Do they have a lot of political contacts? Do they have a large advocate base? And you might want to consider using a coalition intake form to capture this information. So all you would need to do is create a form that sort of asks what are the main strengths that they have and what are some of the things that they might be most interested in doing as you embark on your advocacy effort. Coalition member tasks, it's very important to be as specific as possible. You know, a lot of times coalitions aren't as successful as we would like because everyone gets together and talks about how much they love a particular issue, but there's not a very specific plan of action. So members of the coalition should really develop a plan in concert and work together to identify specific action items. And then, you know, a sort of timeline for coordinating your coalition. When issues are hot, you might need weekly meetings. For calmer times, monthly or quarterly meetings might be appropriate. The key is to really going through those periodic meetings. You know, everyone's sort of had the experience of being involved in a moribund coalition where you kind of did some stuff and then it kind of petered out, and you can sort of keep some of the momentum going by having periodic meetings. It might be monthly, it might be quarterly, just to get people together and see if there's any action that needs to be taken, and again, being as specific as possible about some of those action items. Now, to talk about these first 4 strategies, and actually I should mention here are some coalition examples. To encourage recycling in the city. And the Long Island Children's Museum, which worked with the state judicial system and child services to sort of help on what people don't always recognize that museums might be engaged with, which is sort of a community service example. Now, I know these are both in New York, so do feel free to type into the Q&A box any of your coalitions, web links we can go to, and or do feel free to email the AAM staff, which we're going to give you the contact information at the end of the call. Now, to talk about these first 4 examples, I'm going to actually unmute Kathy Foley's line, who is the director of the Woodson Museum. And Kathy, unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you, it worked earlier, but I'm going to have to ask you to try and enter your audio pin again because I am now not able to mute and unmute your line. I don't know what happened here. So Kathy, your audio pin is #36#. We must have had some sort of overall problem here. Kathy, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to strategy 5, and if you could, I'll talk about that very quickly. And if you could actually just try and call in again, because I have no idea what happened. We tested it earlier, it worked, and now it's not. So I apologize for that. So Kathy, if you could just try and call in again, just hang up your line, and you see if you look on the audio button, you can see use telephone, and you can see how you can call in again. I will check this back in a moment, but I'll continue on to strategy 5, and we'll check back in with you in a moment. So strategy 5 are the benefits of Web 2.0 outreach. So as you recall, strategy 5 is using Web 2.0. And really, I think Web 2.0 is an untapped resource for advocacy. There are over 300 million people on Facebook. 20% of Internet users use Twitter. And it's really effective for pulling advocates and legislators in, not just pushing information out. So the key here is that you're not just pushing an email legislators and staff and advocates into your Facebook pages, your blog, etc. And your patrons and your friends and the legislative audience already use it. So it's a great tool for engaging in advocacy. And we did get Kathy back on the line, so excuse our brief brief overview there of benefits of Web 2.0, but I do want to get Kathy's perspective on those first 4 strategies. So Kathy, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your line, and go ahead.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, that worked. Sorry about that.
Well, I could hear you, but obviously couldn't speak earlier. I just want to follow up on the wonderful information you've already shared. So much of this is really common sense and falls under that don't reinvent the wheel. But I think that it's always important to remember the common courtesies that pay dividends. And the fact that successful relationships are always reciprocal ones. They're only good when each party benefits in an appropriate way and receives appropriate benefits. So if museums begin by sharing information with legislators, not just on the federal level, but state and local as well, and not only making those connections and introductions when we need something and ask for something, I think we tend to get much better results. The things that we find helpful here and have been successful for the Woodson Art Museum are to keep in mind that good relationships are two-way. They have appropriate benefits. No one feels used or taken advantage of. And basic cordiality and manners are always important. I personally find this has worked well for us. I handwrite notes on all the invitations that go to legislators and their staff. It takes a little bit of time, but you indicated earlier the volume of correspondence communication. Now, it doesn't work in sending. We don't want our invitations to be irradiated. We're using handwritten notes locally and statewide, making calls for something that's federal. I also forward the AAM advocacy messages when appropriate to my contacts in legislators' offices. I always add a personal message, and again, that keep in touch not just when we need or want something, but just to check in. Being conscious of what you see in the local newspaper relative to your legislator, again, that works for your local alderperson, your state representative or senator, as well as our federal legislators. And again, I really can't overemphasize the importance of appreciating what they do or have the capacity to do by saying thank you. And then lastly, the photo ops. We touched on this, and we've been quite successful more on a local and state level, but being conscious of photo opportunities at the Woodson Art Museum relative to legislators' constituents, and being able to invite a legislator when their specific constituency school is in our building with an opportunity for a photo op that can then be shared with the local media, shared with the legislator, put on our website. This is a good thing. So I think that's it. I'm happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. And I appreciate, I think that the note that you write on, let me just clarify with you. When you send the invitation in, do you, because I had commented that sending pieces of paper to DC is not always such a good idea. When you actually send the letter in, do you fax it in with your handwritten note on it?
We don't do any of that to DC, Stephanie. Just I reserve those the snail mail, old-fashioned kinds of invitations for local, either the local office. So if we were going, if I were putting a handwritten note on something for Congressman Obie, I would send it locally. And actually,
okay.
I'm really proud to say Congressman Obie is is a dues-paying member of the Woodson Art Museum, so he even receives our information directly to his home personal address, which is, of course, a wonderful thing that I think comes from this consistent relationship building. As Ford mentioned, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think Ember made this a wonderful point earlier in some correspondence we had, that junior legislators might have long tenures, and Congressman Obie is a perfect example. For a very long time, 30 years I actually think. Stephanie, is that right? 30 years, and is now chair of the Appropriations
Are you saying I'm
Committee.
that old, Kathy, that I would know?
No, just that you would know because he's so important, but you would have been an infant.
It's true. Barely a sparkle in my parents' eye. And I do have a question about that membership. What about giving a free membership to a legislator? And I think that the gift rules would not allow that, unfortunately.
I think when you put your legislators on a courtesy mailing list, essentially they're receiving the primary benefits relative to events calendars, invitations, members' newsletters, things like that, even if they're all done electronically or migrating to electronic distribution. And I would have to think or look back as to whether we just solicited the OBs, but they have a long history in the community and connection to the arts, to the Woodson Art Museum, not just Congressman Obie, but also his wife. And so, I think it was a natural for them to show their support in that way.
Yes, absolutely. And then I had a couple of questions for you about some of the events, some of the items you just mentioned. Are there any legalities to consider when using photos?
I think, or at least as we've used them here, it has to do more with, let's say, the school children who are in the photos. And so if we're doing a photo op with a legislator, and I'm thinking we've had most success with our state representative, it happens to be a woman. She loves to come here. She loves photo ops. She loves to see herself in the newspaper. We're just always conscious of getting the names and getting permission through the schools is the question.
Yeah, I think that does, and I think from the legislative perspective, I can say that there's not, in terms of you have to take pictures of only one legislator versus another, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. And then, because the next question is, do we have to worry about equal time? And when you're doing site visits, and Kathy, you can jump in here, but you don't need to worry about as long as you keep away from trying to invite them around the election period, you can invite them, in their capacity as a representative of the district.
I mean, I would say we're an equal opportunity inviter. We're consistently extending invitations. We'd like to welcome them all. I think some take better advantage, some get it, or I should say their staffs get it, and maybe over time others will take advantage of the opportunity. Does that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think the question too was whether when you've got two people running against each other, you need to invite both, but that has to do more with.
I think for sure you do. I mean, I don't think I would do it at an election, in an election year or at an election time. And actually, I found it interesting. I made a note, Stephanie, early on when you were talking about using about the 501c3 rules and making your facilities available, and especially during an election year. We've steadfastly not done that, and we have been asked to do by people in the community. Could they do an event here for such and such a candidate? And we've just steadfastly stayed away from that, as though taking the tack that this is a neutral zone, and maybe that's, as long as we're giving equal opportunity, that's okay. I don't know.
Well, and I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV, so no one should take my advice and then wind up in jail, which would be a bad thing. But you know, there are equal time rules around 60 days before the election. So and it's very important to understand the 501c3 rules,
Right.
which are that you aren't allowed to choose a particular candidate over another, and you can be seen as choosing them if you give them high-profile visibility at an event.
Which is why.
But I don't know you have to worry about the whole year.
But doesn't it seem then that we as a field would be far better served to welcome legislators to our institutions when our institutions are the focus, or our programs are the focus, as opposed to their particular issue or reelection as the focus? But that's
and I've
just
got
the
a couple
naive
comments.
side of me speaking.
Right. And we've got a couple comments here on that. The Rock Hall, for example, allows elected officials to rent the museum, but they're not given any discount, so they're just treated like the general public. And again, these are rules. Yeah, these are rules that everyone needs to understand for their own state as well, because individual states also have specific rules. So, all right. Well, I think I'm going to just very quickly go over Web 2.0, and Kathy, I'm going to go ahead and mute your line if you don't mind.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you so much for the specific examples. That really helped. Appreciate the application of all of this to the museum world. So, all right. And we talked about the benefits of Web 2.0 outreach. I just want to quickly talk about how to do Web 2.0 outreach. We've got a couple minutes left, and then we're going to just make sure we've addressed all the key questions. And if you've got a question or a comment that we haven't gotten to, we will be addressing those after the session, so no worries there. We mentioned the Speak Up for Museums website, and this is where, when we had people who were talking about when I go to, you know, sometimes I get the email that asks people, actually I'm going to go here to the Contact Congress page, excuse me. When I've got, you know, we get emails asking us to send a letter to our members of Congress. This is usually where you're taken, and when you do click on Write Your Legislators, you can personalize the message right there. So all you need to do is it gives you communications here that you can use. You can see this is how you edit the communications. This is how you edit the emails. But make sure this has already been drafted, of course, but you want to make sure that you personalize this so it is connected to your very specific museum, and you can do it right here in the context of the website. You don't need to do. You can do this if you want to put it on your letterhead, so you can print letters to mail, as Kathy mentioned, that she mails them to the district offices, or you can use the email here and you can edit straight from here. You don't need to do any cutting and pasting anywhere else. So it's a great resource. I guess it's kind of Web 2.0. I might call it Web 1.5. But it's really a great resource for personalizing and sending letters, reviewing talking points, et cetera. Also think about virtual town halls and meetings. A lot of legislators are now doing tele-town halls, in some cases because they're scared to meet with their constituents. But those can be a great opportunity also to connect with legislators. And then Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all these other tools. Some quick tips on some of those. LinkedIn is a great resource if you're on it for researching legislators, so you can see, you know, if you've got a particular legislator you're trying to reach out to, how many degrees you are separated from them and who in your network might know them. So you can go onto your LinkedIn page, search on your legislator, and you'll be surprised that you may already know people who are linked to the legislator. Facebook, I know many museums already post action alerts on the Facebook page. You can turn your online supporters into online and offline advocates through this, so just make sure that they know that they have an opportunity. If you ever receive a communication from the Speak Up for Museum site, that they have an opportunity to respond. Also great ideas to find out who is handling any Facebook, Twitter, Web 2.0 resources within the legislator's office, and feed them information occasionally that they might be willing to include on their Twitter or Facebook pages. If you have a special new exhibition opening, legislators are always looking for things that they can send out to other people that demonstrate their connections to the community. Sign up for your legislator's Twitter feed. All kinds of interesting stuff comes through on that. And do remember that the museum AAM is on both Facebook and Twitter, so friend and tweet AAM. They love that. All right. Other resources that are available, register and attend our final one in this series, What to Say in Getting Your Staff and Visitors Involved in Your Museum's Cause. Register for Museums Advocacy Day 2010. And as we mentioned, you can use the Speak Up for Museums.org to send personalized letters and emails to your legislators, and work with your AAM government relations team. They're always here to help. I just want to mention again, as I mentioned at the beginning, that materials from previous sessions are available on the advocacy training page at speakupformuseums.org, and this recording and the PowerPoint will be available as well. And we do have a couple quick questions here. I just want to make sure that we addressed. Is it better to invite the person to come for an event already happening so they are with their constituents, or for a special tour that only they can get? And Kim, I think both are good ideas. They do love to be with their constituents, but you also might want to have an opportunity to take them aside for a little bit and talk about the very specific things that they can do to really help you with the museum, so that it's you have an opportunity to talk about IMLS funding, any IMLS grants that you have and what you've done with them. So I might try and sort of combine those two options. But if we go back to reinventing the wheel, not reinventing the wheel, taking a look at the events you already have going on and getting your legislators engaged can be a great way of just reminding them that you're providing a lot of services to the community. And a question here, which might be difficult to address: how do we deal with hostile legislators? Well, there's so much you can do on that. I think one key point, this would be a good place to wrap up with, and sort of a good way to bookend the online training session here, is sometimes legislators are hostile to the very hard asks that we make. So when we ask, we want this particular level of funding for IMLS, for example, they may feel like, as Ford mentioned earlier, that museums are nice to have but not necessary. And so it may feel a little hostile when they're saying no to you all the time on that ask. But legislators and their staff, they do like to say yes to people. And so if you can make some of these easier asks that we've just talked about, if you can actually see if they can come and visit the museum, and maybe you won't get the legislator there, but you might get a staff person there. If you can just do some of these simple things like adding them to your newsletters lists or your press release lists, if you can follow them on Web 2.0 platforms, if you can become their quote-unquote fans on their Facebook page, sign up for their Twitter feed. Also, if you can, as we were talking about in building coalitions, if you can find people in the community that legislator does respond to, and those people also support your museum, and build a coalition with them, I think you're going to have a lot more success with some of your more quote-unquote hostile legislators. And we'll talk a lot more about engaging others in your cause on the next online training session, which I hope you will participate in December. And with that, I know we're running a few minutes over, so I'm just going to thank you all again for being on the line, and hope to see you on a future webinar. Thanks so much, and we will talk with you soon.